Hi, and welcome to Chain Reactions, a weekly live stream from Myosin XYZ, the leading global marketing network, and hosted by yours truly, Blake, and my co-host, Polina. Tune in each week as we jam on the latest happenings in the wild and wonderful world of Web3. We're live on Unlonely.app every Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern, and release the pod every following week on Tuesdays. Now, let's talk Chain Reactions. If you guys are
ready to roll.
All right, let's rock and roll. All right, well, listen, number one, welcome everyone. This is one of your co-hosts, Blake, along with Polina. This is Chain Reactions. It's our weekly live stream where we bring on prominent guests, founders, heads of marketing, and just general all-around awesome people from around the crypto sphere. Talk about fun stuff and the latest and greatest. I think today we have Mike Tango Bravo, MTB, and Tay to talk all around Argentina. So what is the future of crypto and what does it look like? And why are we so bullish and excited about Argentina? I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff to talk about here. So I'm going to stop talking and throw it over to Mike and Tay. If you could just introduce yourselves and kind of set the stage and we'll get going from there.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tay.
Mike, I'll grab the mic for a second. No pun intended. So my name's Tay. I'm working with Myosin to look at innovation, essentially, look at where crypto is being adopted and how it's being adopted. And we just ran a research report to look at the Argentine market because it has a really interesting use case, a lot of adoption, and people don't even necessarily know what's happening behind the scenes, but it's just being used in a real world setting. Yeah. Over to you, Mike.
So I'm Mike Tango Bravo. I'm the founder of Open Vino.org, a Web3 platform for tokenization, traceability, and transparency for the wine industry. So I've kind of got a foot in both sides here. I started a winery called Costa Flores in Mendoza in Argentina in 2003, so 20 years learning the ropes in the wine world. And in 2018, we launched Open Vino, started tokenizing our own production of wine, and now we're opening up to other wineries, starting in Argentina, but really for the 70,000 wineries around the world, and bringing a real world use case, something that's drinkable and interesting,
Yes.
and beyond just talking about stablecoins.
Yes, and real world use case, right? That's the exciting thing. Yeah, and actually, I realized, just to set some context as well, I think when we look at Argentina in general, right? I think what's been fascinating is it's a crazy situation for people who may or may not be aware, right? I think we had a 211% inflation rate in 23. The currency was devalued by 50% 2 years ago. There's some exciting news. I think I just saw the other day, Malay announced that you finally hit a budget surplus for the first time, or first time in 100 years there wasn't a deficit, which is amazing, right? That's a big deal. Yeah, but I would love to kind of get your take as we're starting to hear.
Yeah, so I'm from the US.
Yeah.
But I've been in Argentina. I first came to Argentina in the early 90s. So Argentina has always been a roller coaster of instability. There's a different and things like that. So, to say 211% inflation is an incredible thing. But actually, Argentines are have been through lots of really kind of interesting economic episodes over the past 20, 30 years, or more. And so it's not that shocking here to say that the instability of the Argentine economy in many ways is what made, the irony is that it's what brought crypto to the forefront earlier here than it did in other countries, just because there's a series of challenges. One of those challenges is the unstable currency that's constantly being devaluated. It's also years of currency control markets, which this is something that most people outside of Argentina are unfamiliar with. The idea that I can't walk into a bank and say, I'd like to change my pesos for dollars because I'm going on a trip or I need to pay for an importation or something like that. It's like, well, the answer is, who gave you permission to buy dollars, right? And so since it is a controlled currency market where the government sets the exchange rate. And inevitably, if you do this, and this is 1960s economic policies, right, that we know that don't work, but it meant that access to hard currency spawned a black market, or what we call the blue dollar in Argentina, for exchange outside of the banking system. And, this also meant that there was a reaction from the previous government to say, well, okay, we have an official exchange rate for everybody, but if you're importing this thing, we'll give this rate. And if you're buying tickets to go to the World Cup in Qatar a few years ago, you can buy tickets, but at this exchange rate. So at one point we had like 20 different exchange rates in Argentina, and a lot of hoops that you had to go through to deal with this. So, for me as a small business owner to say, I'm going to wire you funds to a company in Barcelona, or even have them send money from outside to Argentina, it can take weeks or months to do. And so there's all kinds of friction around that. And if you add to that friction around things like establishing a business, so just starting up a company, if you can take an extreme to say, well, to create a LLC in Delaware is something you can do online and in the morning. Here, to start a business could be easily a 6-month arduous process with a lot of lawyers and people in the middle. Even opening a bank, where I'm saying, look, I'm not asking for credit because you're not going to give me credit. There's no mortgages in Argentina. So I'm not looking for any credit. I just want to open an account and give you my money to work with. That even that can take weeks or months to do. And so it's not just the exchange and the currency that creates a lot of friction. That's a lot of traditional property registration, intellectual property registration, starting a company, hiring and firing people, and these types of things have a huge amount of friction. And it's this friction that spawned a very vibrant Web3 developer community going back 10 years now to say, okay, well, there's this, 10 years ago as well, we've got this new thing called Bitcoin. Maybe we could use this to handle payments in and out of the country. And then, so now to have a conversation in Argentina and talk about not just using crypto as a payment method, but as P2P lending, or talking about DAOs and talking about all kinds of other things. You already have a level of sophistication of people that say, okay, you don't have to tell me the story that starts with, there was this person called Satoshi Nakamoto, right? We can go straight into, talking about using a DEX or liquidity pools or, things like that, and in conversations. And so the irony is that you have this very kind of fragile or volatile market space with a lot of very old mechanisms for doing standard business practices that has fostered this community that's doing things that maybe you wouldn't see so necessary or apparent in the US or in Europe or in Japan. So that's where we are today.
You painted a very vibrant picture of how, like with the exchange rates, the banking, the inability to take mortgage and stuff like that. How does, people adapt to this chaos with crypto right now? How do normal people use it for the most part? Just so that we paint, the better picture of how with adoption of crypto, some things changed.
Yeah, so I mean, as you outlined in the report, and Tay's report, the adoption of crypto in Argentina as compared to certainly with other countries in Latin America and the world is quite high. But for the most part, this is a way to have access to digital hard currencies. People are buying USDC and DAI and USDT and that kind of thing as a way not just to move money in and out of the country, but as a way to hold something of value of a hard currency. Even after the banking crisis in 2001, even the idea of like, okay, I have dollars, I'm going to deposit those dollars in the bank is now no. So because there was not just a run on the banks, but also a forced conversion of people that had savings in dollars to pesos at an official exchange rate. After that, Argentines have always been reluctant to hold any of their savings that they would have in a hard currency in a traditional banking system. So I would say that for the most part, that's where crypto is being used. That's the majority. But since people are accustomed to saying, okay, I have a wallet, or I'm using this fiat on-ramp to buy USDC, not just because I'm going to travel or buy something abroad, but just as a savings mechanism. Now I know what a seed phrase is and a wallet address is and how to do basic transactions. Oh, what else can I do with this?
Yeah.
And so that's it's an entry.
Yeah, Mike, just to add to that, really interesting look at the trading data in Argentina. Like Milei got elected in December 2023, was it? And
Yeah,
then between
November.
January, yeah, forgive me,
Yeah, yeah.
between January and May, the trading volume in Argentina went from like 10 million US dollars worth to 50 or 60 million. Like it just went every single month. Yeah.
When you were working on the report, Ty, what were the most like shocking things or unexpected things that you came across, except for 200% inflation rate?
Yeah, I mean, massive inflation. The biggest thing that jumped out at me was that a lot of the time, companies that were building in Argentina, they weren't necessarily building their own infrastructure. I had a really interesting conversation with a dev who was essentially saying that he did some investigation and followed a wallet address and found out that some of these companies were using larger players like Binance to be the back end of this, and that actually how people are using this, like you could segment them into 3 different user groups. You've got your developers, who are like a core group who Mike would talk to a lot. Then you've got your mum and pups who are just there to essentially use this as a hedge against inflation, and they don't really care whether or not there's a crypto backing to it. And that's where these players are creating nice front ends, but then they're tapping into somebody like Binance to do the back end, or they're using Avalanche to have essentially an arbitrage opportunity where they give the customer 4% yield and they keep 2%, whatever the numbers are. And then there's also the use of quavers, which I thought was really interesting. This is happening and has been happening for, how long have quavers been around for, Mike, do you think?
Just explain what those are again.
Yeah,
For
sorry.
people who are listening.
Quavers are what Mike referenced earlier, which are the informal currency exchanges. So there are a group of people who essentially you would go to them rather than going to a bank, and you would be able to buy the currency at the blue dollar rate, which is different to the official exchange rate. Am I getting that right, Mike? Are there any?
Yeah, so a cueva or a cave is where you would go and change money without going to the bank. So basically you have a cueva or a cave, and you have an arbolito, the tree, right? And arbolito is a guy that's standing at the tree someplace in town, is actually doing an informal exchange for dollars and hard currency. And this has been around for forever, since there was currency restrictions, and it's pretty much out in the open. So these are not strictly legal exchange places because they're not exchanging at the official rate, but they have signs and people know where they are, and it's been tolerated. So it's kind of like, give the comparison. In South America, you have Argentina and Venezuela are 2 countries that did a forced currency restriction, right? Have the government set the exchange rate. In the case of Venezuela, trading unofficially, so a black market or a blue dollar currency, whatever you want to call it, was quite cracked down upon. In fact, in Venezuela, you had even a website that would publish the unofficial rate, the street rate, would get shut down if the website was based at any hosting within Venezuela. And so I was working with a data center project around 2010, 2012 Caracas. And so what people would do would start publishing, instead of saying Bolivar to dollar exchange rate is X, they would call it lechuga verde, or green lettuce. And so what's the green lettuce rate today? And everybody knew that if you're talking about green lettuce, you're talking about dollars, right? And
People get so creative. I love this.
Yeah.
And so these
Like,
popped
just
up
don't
all
say
over
the
the place.
name.
And then the government started cracking down on that and would say, okay, we're shutting down these sites. You can't have these kinds of things. And of course, they just moved their sites outside of Venezuela. And then you had to access through a VPN because these were blocked and all these kinds of things. So, but my point being that the reaction, so both countries did or do even today currency restrictions. But in the case of Argentina, it was like, okay, this is illegal to trade at the blue market rate, but we're only occasionally going to do a shutdown of these companies. And one of the interesting things that this produced is that the regulatory bureaucracy in regular banking in Argentina is very steep. And this comes to the 2001, 2002 Corralito, which is when there was a run on the banks, and the banking system was overhauled, and the Argentine government at that time said, okay, there's all of these different procedures you have to do for pretty much any operation. And it made it so there's so much friction in the traditional banking system that it's not just the exchange rate from dollars to pesos, it's just everyday interactions are quite complex. And so the informal banking, the cuevas, not only do they offer the right exchange rate, but it also is almost like a personal banking service at some point where you could just call up and say, hey, this is Mike, could you send money to here? And fine, like, okay, it's done, right? There was no, because they didn't have any of the regulatory constraints because they weren't regulated, then you actually had this very easy kind of free-flowing system. Now, that doesn't mean there's access to credit or access to traditional financial instruments. You're not going to go out and buy stocks and bonds. They're not brokerages. They don't, So that only is as handling and resolving a low level of transactions and banking needs. But it's kind of interesting how a very regulated system oftentimes can spawn such an unregulated system that basically, if I had to change money in one of these places, is like putting a thing on a post-it note, send from Mike to this person or this place, and I was like, that's it, the no ID, no KYC, none of this stuff. And so that's kind of gone away now because things have gotten more flexible. Certainly. I guess my point is that it was tolerated in a way that in Venezuela it wasn't and isn't, and though crypto is certainly used as an instrument in Venezuela, nobody's developing on the scale that you have in Argentina visible platforms and things like that because it is, does have a lot of criminal penalties with it. So
it's interesting.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's interesting too that you talk about regulation because now the government is coming out with ways to regulate this, and there's a VASP framework, which is a virtual asset. Help me with the last two. Something.
It's a framework. Yeah.
It's a framework. Anyways. The acronyms are my nemesis.
It's all right. Yeah.
But
so what does it do?
There's 5 different licenses. So they're coming out with you need to apply for a license if you would like to be an exchange that transacts between fiat and crypto, or there's a different license for crypto to crypto. There's another license for if you're just a service provider. And again, this is starting to bring crypto into the regulatory framework. But based on how everything else has been enforced, it'll be interesting to see how this really plays out, whether or not people are applying and using these licenses and whether or not it's enforced.
Yeah, so I think that the current situation is that there is a lot of conversations and talks about how to regulate crypto, but enabling it. I think there's an openness right now from the current administration to see, okay, how could we enable some of these tools? Personally, and this is just me speaking, I think that the attitude is almost like, okay, these things you guys are talking about are new and quite complicated. Please don't ask us to come down with regulation right now. Just do it if this is working. And so I think that there's a kind of a hands-off approach for at least for now, because it is kind of the golden goose in a lot of ways for a lot of growth for Argentina. So I give a lot of talks in universities and around the country talking about, Open Vino and tokenization of wine and what is tokenization, what's a DAO, and all these different types of things. And I always finish my talk saying, you might hear that I have an accent in Spanish and you think, okay, this guy is talking about something that's happening in the US or it's happening in Europe. And actually, like I said earlier, it is, I think, more advanced in many ways in Argentina. And so because of inflation and instability, there's a huge Argentine diaspora to go live abroad over the past few years. That's slowed down quite a lot in the last 12 months. That's my perception. I don't have any data to back that, but it seems that that's the case. So I always finish my talk saying, I'm telling you about something in the case of Web3 services, crypto, that is really being developed here and exported, and not the other way around. I'm not telling you about something that's happening abroad. So the sensation is that, yeah, there is work right now with regulators to come up with a more comprehensive, sensible framework. But because, as we know, a lot of these things are going so fast and complex and whatnot, I think that the beneficial attitude so far has been, all right, just do it and tell us how you're doing it. So So I'm working with, aside from my project, Open Vino, working with a lot of startups and Aleph and the Crecimiento movement. And one of the things that we're basically asking the startups is, tell us about your problems or resistance or questions about regulation, regulatory questions. What are the day-to-day problems that you're running into? Let's try to, with a group of different startups, come up with a, maybe not a best practices guide, but basically saying, okay, these are the sensible way that we think that things should be handled. Let's talk to some lawyers, let's talk to some accountants, let's get people's feedback. And since there is kind of a greenfield space here, let's make sure that the things that we're doing and proposing actually do make sense, and something that, while might not be written into law next year, would be a reference point to say, oh, okay, so that's how you would tokenize real estate. Or if you're selling a utility token for a bottle of wine, like I am, how do you handle sales tax on that, right? How do you handle, for example, my accountant at the end of the year says, okay, you have all these tokens. How do we register this on our financial statements, right? What is it worth? And so how can we take these lists of things and come up with a sensible set of recommendations or statements and say, well, this is how we're doing it. It doesn't mean that this will be the basis of a regulatory framework, or that everybody's going to be on board with this, or that everybody has to do it the same way, but it's basically trying to come up with some good examples of ways that doing this approach can work. And again, it's not just the currency problem, it's a lot of regulatory problems. So I'll give you an example. For me to start a company and incorporate a company in Mendoza in the west of Argentina, you end up with, after you do a whole bunch of different paperwork, you end up with a stack of 8 or 9 leather-bound red books that, when you say, okay, we need to have, by law, we need to have a shareholders meeting with this period, right? Those have to be signed. Those have to go to a special place to get a certain kind of photocopy and a stamp. I mean, it's a very 17th century thing. So we're looking at that and saying, all right, we could hope
could have
for
been an email,
Have a DAO.
as they say.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we
Instead
could
of pouring wax and
yeah, it is very kind of like, oh wow, this is really, really old school in some ways, right? And now that's not to say that everything is like that. There are lots of things that are very modern for more things, but some of the practices are quite old. And so I think one of the ways we're looking at it is like, well, we could either have good governance for the next 30 years, and in 30 years reach the level of modernity and stability like Spain, right? But that's pretty unlikely that we're going to upgrade to get to where they are today and have good governance for 30 years. Certainly, there's no track record of that in the past 50 years. So the other option is to say, well, let's take some Web3 paradigms and tools and just leapfrog all of those and do what, rather than trying to get up to speed with some of these practices. So that's the challenge and the reason it's so interesting and dynamic here. But
It's
as you
almost like a cold restart, right? And I think that's the exciting thing. And I think a good analogy to draw to that actually is over the past 20 years, right? I think you've seen a lot of countries around the world that, Argentina is a very specific example, right? But there's a lot of other countries in the world that maybe weren't their economies weren't quite as developed, and they didn't have widespread adoption of desktop computers, right? But when the mobile phone came out, a lot of them, kind of like you're talking about, just leapfrogged right over that, and they said, we don't need these desktops, like that's old school. And then suddenly there are entire economies in Africa, Asia, all over the world, Latin America as well, where it's just like you can people run entire businesses and all these off just their mobile phone. So I think it's a very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the mobile phone is always a good one, both in the case like leapfrogging the needs for landlines and going straight to cellular, or so you see countries like Rwanda where that happened basically overnight. Or you have, the case of like M-Pesa and Kenya and using digital currencies and other ways of paying pre-crypto that also had that effect. And so yeah, definitely that's the case. My favorite example is where I think, to the regulatory question, where I think it's going to go is kind of like, in 2003, you had this company appear called Skype, which said you can do voice over IP and talk for your 8 hours without paying any money to your friends in Japan from
Oh,
Argentina.
I missed that. Yeah.
There was this, initially here in Argentina and in the US and everywhere else, there was this reaction like, well, hold on, the telecommunications are highly regulated. That's not legal. Let's figure out how we're going to regulate voice over IP, because otherwise we're going to destroy the telco market. And so much time went by that eventually it's like, well, now it's ubiquitous. Everybody's using it. Either we want to get off of the train of prosperity and not allow voice over IP, which a few countries did, or okay, I guess we don't have those regulations anymore. And of course, the telco industry didn't disappear. And so I think that in this case, there's a lot of comparisons that once you've reached this critical mass of people using crypto as a way to a savings mechanism or a cross-border payment mechanism or achieving P2P loans or these kinds of different things, that once people are using it effectively enough, then I think a lot of the regulatory questions will become moot, and we'll have other regulatory questions that actually are more interesting to concern with. So I'll give you an example. We're launching this will be the second or third time we've done this. We're doing a staking of wine-backed tokens onto Pwn.xyz, which is a peer-to-peer lending, basically saying here's 1,000 tokens backed by 1,000 bottles of wine. We're looking for a loan for 90 days in DAI. Who's offering us the best terms? And as soon as we find one that we like, hit the button and we've got a loan. Whereas getting any kind of a similar loan here in Argentina would be very difficult, if not impossible.
More permissionless markets, right? I actually just gave a presentation on DeFi, and it's like that's the promise of DeFi. Real quick, before we dive too deep, I realized I just want to like level set on a couple of things. I just realized at the beginning of this, I didn't set the context of there is a report on the state of crypto in Argentina.
Great report, yeah.
And thank you. And Mike contributed to it. Ty here was the primary author here, and big shout out to Ty. Really exciting stuff. We'll link it in the show notes, and I think it's in a thread in the live tweet right now. Now that being said, I think would love to, just in the interest of like make sure we cover everything, I would love to talk about Aleph and Crecimiento, and what exactly is that? I mean, we've been talking about government, like let's bring it home, right? Like, and I think it's happening right now. I have some friends in Buenos Aires who are messaging me. They're like, "What? Are you here?" And I'm like, yeah, "Next year."
I'm here right now.
Exactly. And yeah, I'm sure you'll run into them, right? So I would love to hear about Aleph and Crecimiento, and how that's going, what you're excited about, what you're seeing, and set the context for like the government involvement with the sandbox and all that. And then I would love to also obviously talk about Open Vino and what you guys are doing and how that ties into all this. So yeah,
sure.
The floor is yours. Yeah.
So yeah, I just arrived. I was in Barcelona. I just arrived yesterday to Aleph, and this is our summer pop-up.
Nice.
That started on Monday and it runs through the 20th. And so Aleph is our pop-up city that we did our first one in August, which was super interesting, successful. Lots of people come, different tracks happening. And so now we have the 9th to the 20th, Aleph Verano, Aleph Summer, because it's summer here now, and lots of interesting things going on. We have a big co-working space, huge space here in one of the best neighborhoods in Buenos Aires, and different things that are happening. So right now we have a ZK bootcamp, which is about doing programming ZK on ZK Sync and doing FHE, fully homomorphic encryption, with Zama. And there's probably 80 people in the room just behind me doing workshops with coding with FHE and ZK, which is really exciting to walk in there and see people talking about fully homomorphic encryption and these types of services, right? We have a hackathon that starts Thursday. I think it's Thursday evening through Sunday. And it's, I don't know, I think 200 builders, 150, I think.
And real quick, you mentioned the ZK sync thing. I think something really interesting that I saw, and I want to throw this over to Ty real quick, because I saw this in the report, and would love to get your take on it too, Mike, which is, I think ZK Sync, even when I was there, and it sounds like they're still quite active, right, in Argentina. But my understanding is they rolled out some kind of like ZK Pass in Argentina. So curious to hear like how the reception's been to that, if that's really been taking off at all, or yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in there, Ty, but in August, So let me just back up a second. So Crecimiento is a movement that started in May,
Mm-hmm.
basically at a breakfast in May with a bunch of people from Protocol Labs.
That's when I was there, by the way. I was there at the opening ones when they were
Okay,
presenting it. So we may have
fantastic.
walked by each other at some point. Yeah.
Sure. And so there's, Juan Bennett from Protocol Labs and a lot of the OG builders from different Argentine projects basically got together and said, hey, there's this unique moment in Argentina where you have this list of problems that can be solved with, there's a real need for solutions that can be solved with these Web3, a very big and developed developer community of builders, both here and abroad, but that are from Argentina, and a large percentage of the population that's already somewhat aware of crypto, right? They have wallets and they're doing things. So let's take this kind of moment for these three things and see how we can go from how do we get the next 10 million users of crypto in Argentina and Latin America as a broader focus, and use this as a showcase to export to the rest of the world. And so our first pop-up was Aleph in the month of August, and ZK Sync has a Quark ID project, which is basically issuing verifiable credentials, but with the innovation office of the city of Buenos Aires. So Greater Buenos Aires is 20 million people, so it's a big city. And basically they were saying, okay, how can we take your credentials, like your birth certificate or your driver's license or a marriage certificate, and issue a verifiable credential against the DID on a wallet and enable that. And that's an interesting use case because, like I was saying before, when I was telling the example of the leather-bound red books for starting a business, a lot of the systems are both antiquated and also have been hacked. So at one point, there was a Telegram group where if you put in your national identity ID number, it would show your actual driver's license with your
What?
picture and all of your information. It's like,
On
okay,
Telegram?
on Telegram. So that database was hacked. And so like, okay, we can do better with doing VCs. And so here at the Aleph Hub, the co-working space, we actually set up so that when you sign up as a Aleph citizen or as a startup, one of the startups in Aleph, we mint a verifiable credential for you on Quark ID, and you come to the building and you can actually scan a QR code, and that triggers the door opening so you can get into the building using your VC. And it's in the same wallet where you can get a VC for your driver's license.
Verifiable credential for those who may not be aware.
Yeah. It's SSI, so self-sovereign identity, to really take that information outside of a centralized database and give it back to the end user. And so they've just onboarded several million people for credentials here in Buenos Aires, and that's on ZK Sync.
And my understanding, Mike, is that there was this there was this app that users had that didn't have ZK Sync at the back of it, and people were just using it, and then the back end was replaced with this ZK Sync tech. So now people are using this technology without even using it, without even knowing that they're using it. It's like,
yeah, no, absolutely.
3.5 million people just like that onboarded to Web3.
That's the key. Let's go. That's what we need.
Yeah, so that is the key to just, this, let's call it account abstraction to the nth level, right? So that you're not actually concerned about that. You're just downloading an app and it's making your life easier.
So, actually, Ty,
I just wanted to call it back to Aleph because earlier Mike and I were talking and we talked about that there are a bunch of events coming up next year that I think sound really interesting. Like you guys are trying to put stuff on every couple of months. Is that right?
Yeah, so the Aleph that's happening now, we've got a bunch of really interesting speakers and different things. As I already mentioned, the ZK Bootcamp and the Hackathon, which are more technical. We have a regulatory day on Friday where we do have different people from government and conversations about this ongoing conversation about how to come up with some sensible framework for rebooting a lot of these processes. And we just launched an accelerator program with the Graph Paper Capital the applications are open now, but it's starting in January. So this is about funding startups in an accelerator program. We have a founder school that's also starting in January for projects that maybe aren't at the pre-seed stage, but they have a good idea and they need to know how to go from an idea to a fundable project. And we'll be doing in March another pop-up like this with a whole raft of other people. And so right now we've got, I mentioned ZK Sync and Sama and Optimism. And after the last hackathon in October, we're working with Base, and we had an interesting hackathon there. And more than just the nitty-gritty dev side of it, there's also a lot of talks that we have with business leaders, people that are doing maybe on a, in a small group, 20 people sitting in a room, and say, okay, this is how we became a unicorn. This is what we did. These are the things. This is how we overcame these obstacles. And so there's a lot of generosity right now with not just Web3 builders, but more traditional unicorns that have come out of Argentina to say, okay, how do we explain this pathway to a lot of these entrepreneurs?
It's incredible. That's what we need more of.
I just want to call out there's a link in the report to sign up for these hackathons and for the accelerator. And it's my understanding, Mike, that it's open to anybody. So there's a lot of problems that need to be solved in Argentina, and international teams are welcome to apply as well.
Yeah, I just say that there's two things there. One is that this is not, although we're in Buenos Aires, this is not just for Argentine devs or, we're looking for Aleph citizens. That is global. And also it's not just about the days around the pop-up. So it's really about how can we put together a list of projects and startups and protocols with a list of people and devs and okay, what do you guys need to get traction? How are you going to promote? How are you going to test? Do you need 400 beta testers for your app? Do you need to have access to a talent pool? These types of, how can you do a sensible airdrop and actually get something of value out of it, right? Those kinds of things are the questions that we're looking at. This really goes beyond the city of Buenos Aires and Argentina.
So it sounds
a broader
like
audience.
You mostly focus right now on building this community of developers who would bring this tech to the masses pretty much. And would you say that, can you call out maybe some of the things that would make community building efforts more successful in Argentina specifically, maybe some market specific things that would make the campaigns more successful for brands that want to come in the region?
We're doing a combination of some things that are very local and some things that are very much global. On the one extreme, very local, like we did during the pop-up in August, onboarding local shops and restaurants and bars to accept crypto. And we generated a Morphe token, which is a food token that we give to the startups that they could go spend them. And so we did a process of onboarding all of the different places that you could spend crypto and go have lunch. I distributed a bunch of my wine to these places so you could go get a glass of wine when you're, and pay for it with these tokens. And so that's kind of like, how could you jumpstart a local community that's surrounding a pop-up city? Because a pop-up city is really like, we're accustomed to going to conferences, like you go to ETCC or maybe you go to DevCon and you go, okay, I'm 4 days immersed in this, but you're not really part of that community around it, right? Whereas a pop-up city is saying, okay, yeah, there's some co-working spaces and there's events and there's some speakers, but really it's about, oh, there's a gym here and there's these restaurants and there's these, we're doing an asado, a barbecue with these people, and there's different side events that are happening. And hey, I need to talk to somebody that can help me do a legal wrapper for a DAO, or that can help build a front-end designer, or maybe even so not necessarily crypto native skills that also can be leveraged by having this kind of pop-up community. And so once you add that to more far-reaching international protocols and services that are looking beyond just doing things in Argentina, then that makes it more interesting. So in my case with Open Vino, we're tokenizing we're doing tokenization, traceability, and transparency for wine, which basically have three different really interesting aspects. It's not just about recreating the existing business and taking some friction out. It's about new business models. But there's 70,000 wineries in the world spread throughout, half the countries in the world are wine producing countries. So how can you create a model that can go beyond, transnational and decentralized at the same time platform? And so, yeah, it's about bringing these different things together. It's not just about trying to fix a problem in Argentina. We've talked a lot about Argentina, but Argentina is really kind of the reason that you have all of these devs and people working in Aleph and Crecimiento. But that isn't to say that the focus is just solving this problem in Argentina.
And I think that's actually a great transition. But I do want to be mindful of time, right? But I do want to give a bit of space to, I would love to kind of learn a bit more about Open Vino and kind of what you guys are doing and how that's been going. And I think also as a marketing focused kind of podcast, would love to hear any interesting activations. Like, how do you think about, getting the word out about Open Vino and how does one join? How does
Sure.
one participate? Yeah.
So I'll give you guys the high level of it. So basically, Open Vino, like I said, we're doing tokenization, transparency, and traceability for the wine industry. This breaks down into three areas. One is essentially enabling a winery to issue a fungible token backed by a bottle of wine. So basically, they're creating a digital asset that one token represents one bottle of a particular label of a particular wine. And wine is super interesting for tokenization because of basically three things. Wine has built-in scarcity. So when we pick grapes here in Argentina, in my place, we're picking grapes in March. We're fermenting this grape juice with yeast that's converting it into something delicious and drinkable during the month of April. By the 1st of May, there is a certain number of liters of this wine that's going to go into bottles at some point. We need to age it for a period. Usually, in my case, we age for about 3 years before the wine is actually ready to go to consumers. But there's only a set number of bottles that there's going to be, and so I can't go legally and say, well, I'm going to make some more 2016, right, here in 2024, without committing serious fraud. And it's a highly regulated thing because it's food and it's alcohol and it represents something culturally. And it's something we've been doing for 10,000 years, right? Making wine. So it's a very interesting product for tokenization because it has built-in scarcity, because it has a very elastic pricing. So you have $2 bottle and you have $20,000 bottles and everything in between. There's pretty much no limit to how much you can sell a bottle of wine for if people are willing to pay it. This doesn't happen. You can have the world's best beer and you're not going to get $100 a bottle easily, right?
Yeah. It's also the middleman, right? Because the wine market runs on middlemen who undercut the winemakers.
Well, we're not actually focused on changing the existing supply chain.
Okay.
Because wine is a very complex supply chain in that you have a producer, you have an importer, a distributor, a retailer, so a restaurant, a shop, and then the end consumer. And wineries don't sell directly to end consumers, generally speaking. And that's why you don't see wine for sale on Amazon, right? This has to do with a lot of existing regulatory constraints that happen in the US, that happen in Europe. Like the European Union is an open common market. It is for everything except for alcohol, cigarettes, and fuel. So you can't just, in the US also happens. Like if you're a wine producer in California, you can't ship wine to Kentucky just because somebody bought online your product. It's just not that simple.
But you can come to the winery and buy it from there directly, right?
You can, but because there is this existing complex supply chain of restaurants and shops and distributors that have an existing pricing mechanism, if you selling wine directly at the winery, you're not going to undercut the pricing of your channel, right? And so the problem is that it's very difficult for a winery to increase the price or drop the price. And that's something that's very necessary because wine, like I said before, has scarcity built in. It's a product that has very elastic pricing, but it's also a product that gets better over time until it doesn't, right?
It has this in a right way.
Yeah, but some wines would last for 100 years and be fantastic. And some of them have a shelf life, let's say, of a year. And it really has to do with the winemaking process and all kinds of other things. And so it's a really interesting product for tokenization. And people understand that a bottle of wine is kind of like if you have $100 bill, that's just a piece of paper at the end of the day, but it represents this fictional construct, which is money. And a bottle of wine is this piece of glass that actually has no intrinsic value, but it represents a potential future experience. And so these make these really interesting things for tokenization. So we're doing tokenization of wine. We're doing other mechanisms called You Drink It, You Own It that connects consumers with wineries because consumers, like I said, wineries don't have a direct connection with the consumers. So basically, we're putting a serialized QR code on the back of the bottles. So every bottle has a different QR code. And we're inviting a consumer to say, okay, if you scan the QR code, tell us a bit about yourself, take a selfie or a picture with the bottle, and answer 5 questions about your drinking experience, something that's super invasive in your romantic dinner. If you decide to do this, we'll do 2 things. We'll mint an NFT of your experience. So it's like a POAP token for wine drinkers, but we'll also give you a participation in an Open Vino DAO with an Open Vino DAO token. So now you're actually getting something of value for having given your feedback, and you're part of the community.
This. So I'm drinking to gain ownership into this DAO effectively.
Exactly. And not only that, now we can go to the winery and say, okay, you guys are launching a new wine next year, right? Now, traditionally, what you would do is spend a marketing budget on paying influencers and doing a traditional marketing campaign to get your word out. But here's a whole bunch of people that have been drinking your wine, that you know who they are. They're actually consumers, that you have some evidence for that. Why don't you give them some wine tokens for your new vintage and get them to do your retweets and your promotion? So you can pay with you can create liquidity out of liquid, right? Use your own currency, which is your product, to pay real drinkers, real consumers to promote your product, right? So there's a limitless different things that you can do when you're combining compensating feedback for actual people and inviting them into a community, and at the same time creating a digital asset that can fluctuate based on supply and demand.
I'm curious, what has been the most successful so far effort in bringing in more users to actually try out this experience and scan the QR code and submit it there?
So the amount of things that we're asking is quite small. Like I said, we're only asking 5 questions, and one of them is, do you think we should have a winery in our first colony on Mars? This is part of the Martian Wine Federation. And so, yeah, we haven't gotten a lot of information and feedback. Like I can't do some complex analytics on it, but we started in August. We did a beta tasting program where basically we'll say, okay, use our app, scan the QR code, answer some questions, and we'll give you some bottles of wine, or a bottle of wine or a token. So it just opens up the possibility of creating your own currency that you can do these types of things, and not just asking your consumers to give you feedback just for the hell of it. I mean, so you're actually compensating them for taking the intellectual time and interrupting their day to do this and making them part of the project, right? And then the last thing we're doing that is, I think, quite, I don't know if revolutionary is the word, but is on certification. So more and more products that we see today, they have the label on the back of the product that says, is it sustainable or carbon neutral or apt for vegans or fair trade or organic or all of these different things, right? And in the case of wine, you have so many more different types of things, like, is this what's the provenance? Where did it come from? Was this an oak? Was it a single vineyard? Is it a particular winemaker? Is it a particular varietal, right? Because when you're opening a bottle of wine, you're kind of exploring the world, place, a time, and some ideas and a process, right? So that's why there's not the same uniformity that you have in other things. And so the idea of having an attestation or some sort of a stamp of approval saying that this is the product that you're buying and has these characteristics is important. The problem is that the current certification system, let's just take organic as an example, is completely broken. There's a misaligned set of incentives that is kind of, it kind of reminds us of the rating agencies for bonds. Right, so you had, Standard & Poor's is saying you're a AAA rating, but it's because you paid them and they're your customer, right? So if I make an organic wine, I'm paying a company as an auditor to come tell the world, yep, he's organic. But of course, they want to say that because otherwise they're losing a customer. And so it increases the price of the product to do the right thing. And it's very easy to cheat. And so taking that as the core problem, basically we created something called biodigital certification. And what this means is we'll say, okay, organic means 27 things, right? These are already legislated what it means to say that a wine is organic, right? There's about 27 different characteristics. Let's give the winery the tool to do an on-chain immutable documentation with different things to say, yep, I'm doing these 27 things. And this could be sensor data, it could be images, it could be documents, it could be a work log in an app or something like that, that the winery says, yep, I'm complying with these 27 things. But that still doesn't take out the chance that I'm maybe lying about these things, right? And so the third stage that we do is partnering with Kleros. the decentralized court for dispute resolution is saying, okay, here's the 27 things. Here's my 27 points of data on chain. Now the winery is going to deposit for 30 days a bounty and say, if anybody thinks I'm a cheater, you can challenge it. There's a bounty here. You have to put money into the bounty and you have to upload your evidence of why I'm actually not organic. And then we'll give it to the Cleros court and let them vote on it.
Oh my
And of
God.
course, if they vote in my favor, I get all my money and some of your money back. And so I've paid nothing and I have a digital certificate. And otherwise, if nobody challenges it, at least I've put some skin in the game to say, here's some money to prove what I'm saying is actually true. And so it makes it free if you're not a cheater.
That's incredible. This is, I mean, everything you're telling us, I think, I mean, I'm getting excited as a wine drinker myself. Actually, a selfish question, like, where is your distribution? Can I buy some of these bottles in the US? Like, how does that?
Yeah,
Do
so
I have to be?
No, we
Yeah.
have some in the distribution in the US and Europe and Brazil and Argentina. And right now we've done the tokenization of Costa Flores of my wine since 2018. And right now we're onboarding 10 other wineries to show their case because we're taking a very traditional business, right? One of the most traditional businesses and applying these tools that when you explain it to them, they say, okay, we get it. We can certify for free. We can open up new markets with tokenization, access our customers with you drink it, you own it. It doesn't cost the wineries anything to do to use the platform. But we want to make sure that what we're doing is actually working with a traditional framework and not breaking this complicated supply chain and just taking on. So we're not really trying to eke out the friction in the existing system. It's not about cutting out the middleman. It's like, how can we create a completely new model that solves some of these problems? But yeah, if you're
Building
interested,
a
have a
whole
look.
new wine economy. Whole new wine economy. I love it.
And you can always drink it.
Exactly. Great liquidity, quite literally. Mike, I hate to do this, but we do need to start wrapping things up. So I think the way we love to kind of end things is always with kind of rapid fire questions. I don't know if Paulina, you want to ask those, or you want me to do it? Let me know.
You can go ahead if you want.
Sure.
I think you can fit in like 3 to 5 of those. Pick your faves.
So the key rapid fire questions is like, don't think about them too hard, be quick, and then let's just like smash through them. Okay. So I think number one, biggest mistake most founders make when entering Argentina.
Underestimating some of the simple things. Like I mentioned, opening a bank account, right? Like, oh no, this is super easy. And it's like underestimating some of the simple things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we got to run through the rest here. Most underrated marketing tactic or advice that you would give for someone building?
Get other people within the community to beta test your stuff. Get some traction from the community.
I love it. Makes sense. One thing you wish you knew before you start to build in Web3.
One thing I wish I knew before building Web3. So I started this project in 2018, at which point at the time you couldn't send an ERC20 token from MetaMask. So I don't know. I mean, every day is don't underestimate how quickly this can change. I guess that would be it.
I love it. And then probably the last one here, but I think we know the answer. Best place to find tech talent in Argentina?
Mendoza.
Okay.
Yeah. Mendoza, Buenos Aires. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, there's a huge pool of talent here. If you pick any big protocol, any big Web3 project that you know by name, there's either an Argentine founder or somebody from Argentina that's in the core team. So you hear a lot of Argentine Spanish if you go to the DevCon or SEC or ETH Denver or something like that. So there's a huge talent, and we're excited to have more people join us as other citizens, and also to come visit us and enjoy some asados and some bottles of wine.
Dale. Yeah, amazing. So I think that's it for today. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap this up as much as we love chatting. Yeah, I would say thank you so much too. And then, by the way, Mike, how can people find you? How can they find LF at /Crecimiento? Where should they be looking if they want to learn more and connect? Yeah.
Sure. So Crecimiento is crecimiento.build. Aleph.crecimiento.build for the pop-up, but they'll both go to the same place right now. And you can see our accelerator program and our founders school and what we're doing in the pop-ups and lots of different information there. You can find me on Telegram, Mike Tango Bravo, one word. And Open Vino .exchange if you want to see how wine tokenization works. But everybody just please reach out if you're want to be a part of Crecimiento, there's people from all over the world are joining us, and it's an interesting community that we're trying to build and open to lots of ideas.
Very cool. Very cool. We love it. We love
And
Argentina.
fantastic
We're
report,
bullish.
Ty, that you put together. So it's super interesting. I'll recommend you all to download and read his report to get an idea of what, not just because you might be interested in Argentina, but really what is the situation that's going to bring Web3 to make, in our case, Argentina the first crypto nation, but really is something that we can use in places all over the world.
Yeah,
exactly.
And with the way that the world and the economies are all going, it will be really interesting to see how this plays out all over the world.
It's coming. It's coming.
It's coming.
And yeah, of course, yeah. Actually, just a shout out to ourselves and Ty really here, I guess, is yeah, we'll have a link to the report on all promos in the podcast and in the thread. So
I just like
last
to
words?
take a second to thank everybody that contributed. It definitely wasn't a solo effort. There were so many people that put in hours and hours of work, answering questions, like interviews, like just pouring their knowledge into that. Mike is one of probably 30 different people who had a lot to say. Yeah. So thank
you, Mike. Let's go.
You, Mike.
My pleasure. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, guys.
All right, perfect. All right, we're gonna wrap it up. See you online, and have a good one, y'all. All right, ciao, ciao.
Salud.
Ciao, ciao.